All right, well, I'm going to do something and we'll see how it goes. The first time I realized this must have been, I was reading that book when, probably 2010 or 2011. A lot of people like to say that, try to figure out what different things were written in. Was the Old Testament, quote unquote, was it written in Hebrew? Was it written in Aramaic? Were the Ten Commandments originally in Hebrew? Is Hebrew God's language? All of that. The New Testament, was it originally written in Greek? Was it originally written in Hebrew? Was it originally written in Aramaic? And in our circles, you go through all that kind of stuff, right? Everybody's heard these and everybody's got their reasons why they believe whatever. And in a lot of cases, not every case, but in a lot of cases, we can come to a pretty good feeling for if something was actually written in a certain language. I'm past the point in my walk where I am too concerned about that, except for on two fronts. And this is where my concern lies. Number one is that there can be linguistic things that if it was written in one language and then it's been translated to another, that get lost in translation and there's nothing you can do about it. Or there's very few things you can do about it. And then secondly is not just linguistic, but culturally, and sometimes the culture and the linguistic piece come together as one. But culturally, there are things that can be lost, or there are things that are tried to get put into the text because of a cultural shift, and so they're purposely doing something about changing that. So you've got linguistics, which that study, if you want to ever study that out, is called linguistic relativism. And it states that there are certain things that are relative to a particular language that might not be relative to another language. And then there's linguistic determinism, which means that there's no way, whatever this is in this language, it cannot be said correctly in any other language. So the language determines what you are saying, what you are thinking. You can't even think certain thoughts unless you were to speak a different language that has those concepts in it, which is just, it's a crazy idea. I'd never thought of it before, but once getting into all this. But I say all that to say, Jackson and I were talking right before everybody came on, and I was asking for his help a little bit with the Greek because I'm better with the Hebrew and he's got the Greek down. And so it was a question about heaven or hell and different things like that. So we thought we would, not heaven, but hell in particular. And so I thought that we would start with just a background of some of the things we know about the original, the most original. I say original because we don't have the autographs. We have, out of all the books in any Bible, we do not have the autograph. The autograph is the original copy of that particular book. And so we have no autographs. So when somebody says, hey, well, the Bible is inerrant, and you say, well, okay, which one, KJV or NIV or, whatever it is. And they go, no, the originals are inerrant. Well, that makes it a moot point. So what? We don't have any of the originals. So that's where my inerrancy stance is. If it is inerrant, we can't know what the originals say. And then the argument back is, well, yeah, but we've got a pretty good idea. Okay, that's good. But we still don't have the originals. We don't know exactly what's happening. And we have a pretty good idea. And we don't know if the ones we have now are even in the original language, or are they, all of that. Said all that to say that it is in some of the very earliest books of the New Testament, for lack of a better term, that we have in there what are called nomina sacra. Now, has anybody ever heard that term before?
Yes.
Who else? Anybody else? Okay. So what nomina sacra are is in the Greek text, especially in Paul's letters, because Paul's letters are supposedly some of the earliest writings that we have. In the earliest copies of some of Paul's letters, we have nomina sacra, which means holy names. And what it is instead of writing a Hebrew word or concept in Greek, Instead of doing that, what they do is they take what are sometimes called divine placeholders, or in these nomina sacra, and they are used to show this idea of linguistic relativism or linguistic determinism, that the concept that Paul, or whoever the author was of this book, depending upon if it's pseudo Paul or not, but I don't think any of those have it because those were later. The Hebrew concept cannot be conveyed correctly in Greek, so we're going to put just a one letter, like almost like a bigger capital, if you will, capital letter of something, and this capital letter means Almighty. This capital letter means Messiah. This capital letter means Spirit. And so it's almost forcing you to go back to the Hebrew or the Aramaic and look at it from that perspective, which I find completely interesting. And the reason that I'm getting onto this idea is because, as Jackson and I were talking about hell, and in these letters and in the Gospels and different things, you come across words in many of the Greek manuscripts that are Hades, that are Tartarus, that are there any other ones, Jackson? I think there's one other one.
There's Hades and Tartarus.
Are the main two. And obviously Hades and Tartarus are what? Does anybody know where these come from?
Greek mythology.
Mythology, that's right. So it comes from mythology. I would say even further back than Greek, but obviously those two words are in Greek. So yes, Greek mythology. But and so when you're talking about hell or the underworld or what happens in the afterlife or any of these things, you're really automatically, if you're looking at some of the earliest things we have, are either, and I wish I knew because we brought this up spur of the moment and I'm talking about it. Either you have, I don't think there's a divine placeholder for hell, in where hell is translated in English. But you have these Greek words that are from Greek mythology trying to talk about the afterlife. So right away you have a preconceived idea, especially if you've read Greek mythology before and know a little bit about it, what these terms mean, because Tartarus is a specific region in hell, and certain things happen and certain things take place and other things don't. And so if you see Hades, that means something in particular to Greek mythology. Now, mind you, this has nothing to do with Hebraic thought at all. And the Hebrew thought of things, the idea of the afterlife, there's one word that is used, and that word, does anybody know it?
In what?
In Hebrew.
It's Sheol.
Sheol,
Yeah.
that's right, Sheol. So Sheol is the only word that talks about the afterlife from a place of the dead perspective. That's the only word in Hebrew that's used for a place of the dead in Hebrew, not pertaining to necessarily quote unquote eternal life. So you have that. You have one word, and it's not real well defined, and it is a little bit of a place of mystery, but it certainly isn't Tartarus or Hades. And so, when we're going through and looking at some of these concepts, it is real easy to get things conflated and mixed up. As a matter of fact, a lot of our ideas of hell from our subconscious, because being born in America and the way we were raised and all this, come from Dante's Inferno when he created that play. How many hundred? When did he do that? That would have been in the
14th century.
14th century. So that's 800 years of subconsciously putting into the minds of Western thinkers what hell is. And so we so often import ideas into a scripture that just aren't necessarily there. So that being said, many times when you see things in the scripture where it talks about and the evildoers will be destroyed or whatever, it's not even the word Hades or the word Tartarus or anything. It's just the Greek word for destroyed, and we will import that they're going to or some people will. I don't know if anybody here does, but we will import that. Hey, they're going to burn in hell forever because these wicked evildoers are going to be destroyed, and it's few and far between that you even have a verse that just doesn't say destroyed, which obviously means to be destroyed. But does anybody in here believe the doctrine, the Catholic doctrine, that there are two places or I guess Catholics believe in three, but that there are two places to permanently go, I guess I could say, for a Catholic doctrine in the afterlife, and that is either heaven or hell, and ultimately or quickly you're going to end up in one of those two places. Does anybody here believe that?
My ideology on it would be that obviously we see that the heaven is past judgment, but the idea of the eternal damnation and burning for all eternity, there is a difference between damnation and being destroyed, that you are destroyed forever, versus burning in hell. I don't think that you'll be utterly destroyed if you're going to burn in hell for all eternity for the sins you committed. It may be a refinement or a process that you pass through. You pass through the fire of being refined. But I do not believe that me or any of us are going to burn for all eternity.
Okay.
Those people of wickedness who will not repent, who will not turn, they're going to be utterly destroyed. But when it says utterly destroyed, that means you are no more. There is no more remembrance. There's nothing left of you.
Okay. Anyone else?
Yes, I know when I was growing up, I believed that you were going to one of these two places, either heaven or hell. You remember? Come on, Rich. You remember there was a heaven to maintain and a hell to shun. But I have since refined that belief to believe that that those who are wicked and those who are going to be cut off from the presence of the Almighty are going to go into the lake of fire. However, I believe that the lake of fire was not made for you. It was not prepared for you. It was prepared for the devil and his fallen ones. So let's say you go into that lake of fire, having been condemned to death. You're going to go into that lake of fire and you will burn for a period, a short period, because your body was not made for that. And then you will go into non-existence as if you were never born. Okay. So yes, I did believe in that doctrine at one time, but I have a semi-belief of that, but not to that degree. Now, as far as heaven, I believe that Yahweh's kingdom is going to come to, it's already, the New Jerusalem is already above us, but the New Jerusalem is going to become part of this earth. So I've refined that as well. We're not going to, some glad morning when this life is over, we're not going to fly away. We're going to be here.
Okay.
So that's my thoughts on it.
Anyone else?
Yeah. I don't think that there's a heaven and hell where if you die, you're going to go burn in eternity, or if you do good, you're going to go up to the top in heaven and live forever. But I do think that there is a heaven above us, and there is a Sheol below us, and that there is a place where souls are collected and waited until the day of resurrection, when they all come up and they're resurrected, some to life and some to judgment.
Purgatory.
Well, you could call it that, but
yeah, I would call it that.
Well, that has a different connotation than exactly what I'm talking about. Book of Enoch in chapter 22 in the Lawrence version, or I don't know what it is in the Charles version. But chapter 22 explains the 4 hollow places that are underneath a great mountain in the west, where the souls of men are collected. And these different places have different attributes. They're all very similar, but in some places are for the righteous, and it's better there. than in the places that are for the wicked. And in one place they're comforted, in another place they're not. So you could call it purgatory, but it's not like for everybody the same kind of thing. It's tailored towards each person. And even Jesus, when he's talking to Lazarus, or when he's talking about Lazarus and the rich man, he gives a pretty good summation of what the book of Enoch.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Jackson.
He gives a good summation of what the book of Enoch says.
I'd rather not say anything on that.
Jackson, you can't do a groan and then not say anything.
You done started it now. You might as well finish it. What's the thought?
That was an example to the primarily Hellenistic people that they would understand. It's meant to explain something to them in their own
vernacular.
Yes, and that's all that is.
So
Hey,
you're
sir.
saying,
A literal.
so you guys saying that that's not true?
Yeah, in a way, it's not true. He's using a story right out of Greek mythology because he's talking to Hellenists. He uses the word Hades there. And he says this isn't about the afterlife. He says it's about the one who's resurrected from the dead coming back. It's a story really of the lost tribes of Israel, if you want to get into it. But
Then
no,
why would it
I would
you're-
never take that as
then why would
being,
it be? Then what Des is saying?
it's a parable.
Okay.
Okay, so let's put it in a
He said those with ears could hear and understand the parables. So I mean, if they're not gonna hear it, they might take it like a Greek way. But they could also take it the way Enoch says it is. So I mean, It is a concept if it's coming from Enoch.
Why would they not take it the Greek way if that's what he was speaking about and he was speaking to Hellenistic people? He uses words in there in the Greek that refers directly to Greek mythology and the idea of the river Styx and
Where is this? Where are we talking about? Where's this located?
Luke 15.
Oh, so this
16.
is
16, I think.
16, yeah.
Well, we've already talked about the languages briefly, and I doubt they were originally written in Greek. Maybe they were, but at least Paul himself, he might have used the word that was close enough for them, but that's the best he could do. They didn't know.
What language would they have been written in, do you suppose?
I think that they probably would have been written. Are you talking about the original language?
Sure.
It probably was Hebrew.
Do you think,
I would say this. Let's before we get into that, because Jackson's about to come out with some Ginsu knives.
I'm going to pop, but I'm going to just, like I said, I told Rich beforehand, I'm just going to abdicate saying anything this time.
Well,
Hold on. So let's put it in this. Let's go to this. Jackson, do you think, regardless of how the story was conveyed on paper, written down, do you think that Yeshua was speaking to them in Greek?
Well, he surely could have been, because such a high population of Galilee spoke in Greek, and he would have certainly known Greek, and certainly he spoke to Greek people all the time. Why wouldn't he have known Greek? You think he was just a dumb peasant carving little animals out of wood and so forth like that?
So what do you? Okay, so you say that he probably was speaking this to them in Greek.
I'm saying that the New Testament was written in Greek, and there's no doubt about it, because look to who these books are written to.
Mm-hmm.
Who are they written to? Aramaic speakers? Not at all.
So you're saying that every single book in the quote-unquote New Testament was written in Greek?
I'd say probably the ones that weren't were maybe James and Jude, perhaps, even Revelation. Huh?
Okay. Matthew?
Yeah, I think James and Jude were probably written in another language, but I think that all of the other books were originally in Greek. Now, what their sources are in, who knows? But all I can say about that is you got to look at the audience. You know, we're not going to get on here and talk in Latin.
Sure, no, absolutely. I mean, I think that the version of Matthew that we have today is certainly the Greek version of Matthew. I agree. I concur with that.
Mm-hmm.
But I do believe the first book that was written by Matthew was the Hebrew Matthew. But that is interesting. So James, Jude, Revelation, and then I would put in there Matthew.
Matthew, yeah, I would too.
Interesting. But I
would, if they're based on Mark,
they're not all based on Mark. You got to read.
Of course they are.
No.
That's why they call them synoptics on Mark and Q.
Matthew and Mark and Luke are based on Q.
But wait a minute here. Wait a minute. It's two sources, Mark and Q. Luke and Matthew based on those.
I would suggest reading that book I sent you, Two Shipwrecked Gospels. That's a great book, Two Shipwrecked Gospels. And I sent you the text of what he feels the original would have most closely resembled. He goes through verse by verse, story by story, and shows where Mark and Matthew Matthew and Luke borrowed from Mark, where Matthew and Mark borrowed from Luke, and where Mark and Luke borrowed from the original Matthew. And it's a great study.
Why did they find in the Dead Sea Scrolls parts of the book of Mark, they're written in Greek? Why is it that all tradition tells us that Mark was working in Alexandria and Rome?
Okay, but that still doesn't mean that it's Q and it are the ones that are the basis of it. That's just facts that happen to be. That doesn't.
Let me jump in there real quick and give an example. The word that he gives for what someone translated as new months, the word that he gives in Greeks when he says let no man judge you in respect to the Sabbaths and new moons is how they translate it. But what is that word in the Greek? Well, the Greek had their own calendar. So you can't say just because he used that word, he was talking about a Greek month. Of course he wasn't talking about a Greek month. That wasn't the calendar he was using. So yes, you may be right about whatever language it was written in, but I don't think it matters much in the context that we're talking about right now. The word that they have in Greek was the best word that they had to describe this concept if they didn't know Hebrew and know the definition of the Hebrew word. So he did the best he could. And when you find it in a Greek literature or in a Hebrew literature like Enoch, and then you see Yeshua himself saying the exact same concept in Luke, you can't just pass it off as it's Greek ideas.
They didn't speak Hebrew vernacular. That was a temple language.
I know.
The people there spoke Aramaic, which is quite a bit different.
I know. That's my whole point. Regardless of which language they spoke, the best word that they had in whatever language they did speak, that word is going to come from that language and come from that culture, and it's always going to be tied to something from that culture.
That's what I said.
Right. So just to say because it's not a Hebrew word, he was talking about the Greek thing. No, he wasn't talking about the Greek thing. He was talking about a Hebrew concept. He was just using whatever word best encapsulates that idea. And an underworld under our feet is the idea he's trying to capture. Where you go.
What about Paul?
Yeah, he was in the Greek world for sure. On the Luke story that we're talking about, who was his audience? Are you saying Yeshua was talking to a Greek audience, or that Luke was trying to convey something through Yeshua to a Greek audience?
I think that probably both were, actually, because 2/3 of Galilee were Greek speakers, at least 2/3. And in that particular area, the where he was speaking was a capital city, a Greek city called Sepphoris.
But who was Yeshua's ministry to? Was it to Greeks or was it to the Hebrews?
Well, we can answer that by looking at who his disciples were. Half his disciples have Greek names. And then even says Philip, the Greeks say to Philip, we want to talk to the master. And so look at the names. Peter, for instance, that's not a Hebraic name. Philip is not a Hebraic name. Andrew is not a Hebraic name. And I'm not thinking of Thaddeus is not a Hebrew name either. Those are Greek names, at least half of them. Look at the table waiters in Acts. All of those are Greek names, not a Hebrew name among them. Why is that? Why is that? If they're just speaking to Hebrew people, they would have to be down in Judea talking around the temple, because people at that time did not speak Hebrew.
Either way, he came not but for the lost sheep of Israel, and even then only to those who could hear.
We're talking about the ones that authored the Gospels. Now, Papias says that Matthew wrote down a list of sayings by Yahshua in Hebrew. However, if you read the rest of Papias' works, you know he lies his head off. Read all of Papias. There's one lie after the other there that he's making up to make himself out a big shot.
Yeah, but saying that statement doesn't make him less or more of a big shot. That's a pretty much face value statement that there's.
I think that the Beatitudes, those chapters of the Sermon on the Mount, were written originally in Aramaic. I think that's the kernel and the earliest part of that gospel, and that's probably exactly what the guy was talking about when he said that Matthew wrote down sayings of Jesus in Hebrew. And
it could very well have been Aramaic, absolutely, Hebrew or Aramaic. We have now some archaeological finds of coins with Hebrew on them from the time period, so that says that maybe there was a little more Hebrew being spoken and it wasn't a lost language at that point. But certainly, Greek and Aramaic were there.
What's on your dollar bill?
Latin.
Secula seculorum.
So anyway, this is good. I like this. Let me see. Where do we want to go with this?
You know what Khrushchev said?
What did Khrushchev say?
We will bury you. 1963. We will bury you. Said that in the United States.
And that's why he's retired on a farm.
Oh no, he's saying he spoke in English.
He did.
Yeah. So then, I guess we have the idea that you have a Greek, you have, and we know this to be true from the Maccabees and the different things where there was a segment of the population that was trying to not follow Torah and trying to do their own deal, and they would have been allowed to do their own deal under Roman occupation. And so that means, speaking Greek, doing whatever they wanted from Roman culture.
Yeah. 13 books of the Old Testament are written in Greek.
May I propose something that might bend your mind a little?
Let me out of here.
No, listen. All right. If they were, notice that the people from Qumran wanted to go backwards. They wanted to restore something that had existed previously in the way of culture, morals, and theology, because it had been changed. Look at how everyone always speaks about how difficult it is to keep Torah, although it's really not that bad. And then look at the freedoms the Greek culture gave them. It'd be like today, you get a preacher's kid and you turn them loose in the world. These people, even though they were Hebrews, were probably more Greek than they were Hebrew. Most of them. Only a very few were pious, and most of those lived away from the cities. So if Yeshua was speaking to people in cities, he would be talking to the quote-unquote lost sheep because they had gone astray. They no longer followed the ancient laws and precepts and theologies and morals and behavior. They were essentially Hellenized Hebrews. So that's another way you can think of it. Yeah. Look how easy it is to change from something that's stringent and fairly strict and simple into something that's very hedonistic and pleasureful.
Right. What if China had taken over the U.S. 300 years ago? What language would you be speaking today? The Greeks took over that area, and in order for the people to continue to live, they had to learn Greek. They had to go to the gymnasium. They had to worship Greek gods. 300 years. And that's the only way they could keep from being destroyed. In fact, we see in the Maccabees that very struggle coming to pass there. And even the calendars in the first century, the main calendar was a Greek calendar.
And it would make sense then that why the Messiah was sent when he was, because things are going so awry, and they had been for a couple of centuries, that we've got to come in here and right this ship. And then they're not listening. The leaders aren't listening to what he's saying, and they're missing the boat. So let's go back, because one of my biggest problems is this idea that okay, I'll put it to you this way. One of the when I began to study the idea of Trinity, and I was raised a Trinitarian. I've always had a loose holding of it because I saw listened to like a oneness doctrine or different things like this, and didn't necessarily have a huge problem with that, although I would have considered myself a Trinitarian. Although when I looked up the definition of Trinitarian and the strictness that the Catholic Church has had from, I think, the 7th century or 6th century on to what a Trinitarian is, then I really didn't fall into the camp of a true Trinitarian, more of a modalist. But when I began to study out how this doctrine came to be, you get back to the first time that it's used. And so right on cue with what we've been talking about, the first time the word Trinity is used is by a church father named Tertullian. And Tertullian is in the 2nd century, so we're talking 100 and something, maybe 150 or 160, I think. I think he was right there in the middle. He is speaking to a Greek audience, and he understands the triunity of some of these pagan gods, that some of these pagan god myths have a triunity about them. And he knows that there's a Father, he knows that there's a Son, and he knows that there's the Spirit. So he uses that vernacular on purpose to try and show them that this Hebrew idea with the Messiah coming is not some far-fetched idea. Look, you guys believe in triunity. Here, this is the Trinity also. You guys have a Trinity. Here's our Trinity. Now, that's morphed into a bunch of people saying, hey, if you don't believe the Trinity, you don't believe in God and you're going to hell. That's morphed into copyists, scribes, putting in Trinity verses into the Bible that we've had to take out hundreds of years later because now we know that they were just trying to prove that the Trinity existed. So that's the rub for me, that even in Tertullian saying this to these Greek-speaking people, he did not define Trinity how the Catholic Church demands it be defined today. He actually kept it pretty benign and was just making a correlation between the two. And it was in no way, it would have been in no way void of Hebraic thought, his definition, but you've got this title on it now, Trinity, that is obviously Greek, and not just Greek, but Greek mythology. So I've always chided him in my head for doing that. I don't think he should have done that. Here we have Jackson saying, Yeshua was doing it, or at least Luke is portraying Yeshua, whether he did or not. But if you believe that, what's passed down might not be inerrant, but, it's all pretty much there, and there could be errors here or there, but the basic message is correct, then maybe Yeshua did do this, and obviously if you're thinking Yeshua is the Messiah and he's the perfect lamb, that he didn't make a mistake. But I would tend to say that I would go back probably like some of you would and go, I think that Yeshua probably didn't put say this in this Greek style. He might have said it in of a more of Hebraic style. That makes me feel better. And then as they're translating it, know that it's going to Greeks, they switch it a little bit for Greeks or whatever. But that's just trying to make myself feel better about everything that's going on. There's no evidence for that or anything. So am I wrong in chiding Tertullian for using the term Trinity? And we see the outcome. You've got people getting their heads chopped off because they don't believe in the Trinity in the Middle Ages. But yet Trinity is not a Hebrew concept as far as it goes. It comes from mythology. And, how far do you go, I guess, to try to convert somebody? How far into mythology is it okay to go, if at all?
You got your Santa Claus, Easter Bunny.
Yeah, and so then we're pulling out of those. We're saying, I don't want to do Santa Claus. I don't want to do Ishtar or Astarte or whichever one you want to say it comes from. I don't want to do that because I'm not okay with us reading. My family was, probably more religious than 98% of the families in the world as far as what we did with Christmas. And it was still like 5% of Christmas was about Jesus's birth, so so I'm not okay with that. That's why I pulled out of this in the first place. And then I'm going to go, say that, oh, Yeshua was doing this as well. That's that's a big, mind blown to me. I don't know that I buy it. But then again, Luke wasn't even written before Papias, if you can believe Papias, wink, wink. Or it wasn't known anyway. And he was right around the time. I think it happened after, but even Jackson's, pegging, who is it, Aristobulus, that you think wrote Luke Acts? No.
No.
What's his name?
Epaphroditus.
Epaphroditus. So you think it was Epaphroditus in the mid to late 90s. I think it was after that. But the point is that I can much more see Greek ideas being put into Luke being written that late than I can Matthew and Mark being written early. And so that gives me a little bit of breathing room and going, hey, maybe this was added for a Greek audience, or a similar story was morphed from the Q document or whatever. But is it okay? I mean, was it okay for Tertullian to do that? Was it okay for him to take a completely pagan doctrine about the Trinity of pagan gods that comes in that idea of the Trinity of pagan gods comes not just from along the way, like for instance, Thor, the god Thor. We know that Thor was a man and he got deified over the centuries because he was a mighty warrior. And we know for a fact that he's not one of the original Olympians or one of the original Titans or anything. And he certainly isn't from the original triunity coming from Mesopotamia, coming from Babylon. So we know that for sure, but we know Thor wasn't. But we know that Trinity from, what's the word I'm looking for? From Babylon, I can't think of the term, is a Trinity. And it was an evil Trinity, and it was a bad Trinity, and this was happening even before the Torah was given. And then when they get the Torah, they're told, stay away from that, stay away from pagan ideas. And then here we are going, oh, but Yeshua is using a pagan idea about the afterlife. Tertullian should be okay using a pagan idea to describe, not any pagan idea, the main pagan idea that they're supposed to stay away from. I don't know that was okay for Tertullian to do, and I don't think that Yeshua did that. Thoughts?
How about if when you're speaking to a group, you don't realize your words are going to be written down and reinterpreted hundreds and thousands of years later? Say you're using it in the spur of the argument to reach the people.
Absolutely. And I think that's an argument for Tertullian. But what about Yeshua, who's supposed to be, who's supposed to have that,
do we know that that's not just an anecdote that was put in?
We don't. No, that's why I'm asking. I'm pressing you on that.
I think it probably is that case.
So you would say that Yeshua is just more of a simple human being in the sense instead of this?
No. I'm saying that I think that the story that's attributed to him may not have been words that he spoke. Something that's, a composite of what some other teachers or apostles spoke, or just a really cool idea that the author had. And maybe, was it? You don't know. You can't prove it came out of his mouth,
Well, yeah, but we can't prove any of it, obviously.
True.
Which, I mean, there's a way that you can, there is a way that you can kind of bounce some things off of the Torah and go back and forth with that.
It has been used, that passage, Luke 16, as Desmond said, to define the afterlife when it flies in the face of everything else that's said in there from a Hebraic perspective. Did Yahshua do that? I don't know. We were talking about the redactor rather than Yahshua himself, but the whole thing, I know I had this out with an Assembly of God pastor one time, and he said, well, you're going down the lake of fire, you're going to be able to see him down there burning, and look at Lazarus and all this stuff. I mean, give me a break. That gives our faith not only a bad name, but a false name. So I'm not sure if Yahshua used those terms. like Allison said, I don't think that he thought that it was going to be written up thousands of years later, and then the Assembly of God and the Baptist Church and all these other ones,
Yeah.
discarding the Hebrew idea entirely to go to this.
So now earlier, Desmond had said that
22.
that in Enoch there was this idea of kind of the same idea. So has anybody else read that and kind of put those two together, or is Desmond the only one that's done that? Because that'd be a good thing for everybody to study out. If not, are we seeing that as the same thing? I mean, I think that lends more credence. You know, you could argue, you could go in the reverse argument that some people do with the Trinity. Hey, you know, I've got a friend that still believes in the Trinity, a Hebrew roots person that still believes in the Trinity, a minister, and he says, hey, I think that this Trinity that was come from the mystery Babylon religions was just a counterfeit of what they already knew to exist in heaven. And so they're trying to duplicate what they already know the Father, the Son, and the Spirit look like. And that is an interesting thing you can do. You could do the same thing with the afterlife. Hey, Enoch saw what was going on. Yeshua knows what was going on. And this mythology has just tried to create this counterfeit that's very similar to, you know, to try to mess with people. You could go both routes, I guess.
Well, if you take the Trinity, for instance, anybody who believes in Trinity needs to take a look at the definition of Trinity.
Yeah, most don't.
Because when they do, if they're looking at it critically at all, they're going to say this is illogical. This
Right.
cannot be in this respect.
Sure, but I think that somebody who's counterfeiting and then trying to define through the centuries of men trying to redefine that, you know, it can become illogical, but it certainly could have been, you know, this idea that runs counter. In my opinion, I take the stance of Shimon Kefa in the Clementines, where he says, look, if you're speaking about something other than what your master has taught you, then you're no longer sent by the master. You're on your own, you know, you're on your own deal. So to me, to try to define it with a word or a concept or an idea any more than is already defined in the scripture is us doing that very thing. But yeah, so anybody else? We got about 10 more minutes here. This didn't go the route I thought it was going to go, but
Shalom. Hello.
Norman, yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I meant to answer earlier the issue where they're quoting Enoch. I had a problem with the microphone. And I keep running into this. The problem with a lot of people, they're going to the interpretation, this is a fascinating subject right now. We know that the interpretation of scripture is everything had to comply to the Masoretics as opposed to the Septuagint. And now people are now using the Lawrence interpretation of the Dead Sea Scrolls or the Book of Enoch and saying, oh, Lawrence in his research says this. And with all my research in the Dead Sea Scrolls, Book of Enoch, you name it, we do not see an interpretation as put forward by Lawrence. This is a Jewish interpretation who has to import the moon calendar to make it comply with a Jewish mindset and the moon system. And people are running into this problem all the time. Also, we have the interpretation of the Dead Sea Scrolls by, what's this guy's name? Vermes. And, you know, I don't see any of that in the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Book of Enoch, or Jubilees, any of it. It was in the Dead Sea Scrolls. That is what we must quote from, and that is my calendar, directly word for word what we see there. Not from what Lawrence or someone else says, this is what it means. Guys, it's an interpretation, and it has to comply with your mindset, and this is where we're running into a lot of problems.
So let me ask you this, Norman, because it's a sensitive subject, and it's one of the subjects that when you go into linguistics, when I was at the seminary, you know, this idea that, you know, you've got to make judgment calls about things. It's your job if you are, you know, in fact, translating. And so, you know, if we were to be teaching somebody who didn't know English, we were to be teaching them English as a second language. And we come across the American colloquialism of, throw the baby out with the bathwater. You shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Now, when you say that, it doesn't have anything to do with babies, and it doesn't have anything to do with baths. What it means is, if one part of the plan is bad, don't throw out the whole plan. Just fix the part that's bad. Don't toss the whole thing. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. So there are colloquialisms in every sort of there are in every language. And then, of course, when you're looking for the emic meaning of a verse or a saying, then you have to get into the culture and the surroundings and the colloquialisms and everything that's going on. So, and I don't know this, Lawrence. I'm just making a counterpoint and asking for your opinion on it. So Lawrence is obviously looked at as someone who knows the things that are to be known about that society as much as or more than other experts. And maybe he's put a lot of time into it, which is why Lawrence is the go-to. Now, does that mean he's always right? Certainly not. But there's got to be a reason that people are pointing to him. So in your mind, you're saying that you don't want to look at Lawrence at all, and you don't want to see what he says and why he says it, and you just want to read the text and then, according to your understanding, interpret that, or you want to use him but not totally rely on him?
No, not at all. When I was, we're talking over years now, but when I was running into these problems, I said, where did they get this from? Where did Lawrence get this from? Because I was listening to what they were saying.
Sure.
Said, okay, interesting. Where? Show me where in the Dead Sea Scrolls, in the Book of Enoch, anywhere it says that, and you don't see it. I just don't see it written. I've got what's his name, Professor. I'm having a.
Eisenman.
Yeah, Eisenman. The Dead Sea Scrolls, the New Translation, Enoch, various versions. We do not see what Lawrence says it says. It's not there. It's his interpretation. So that's the problem. I mean, he's got a lot of interesting things to say, yes, but certainly I've gone into it and looked for it, and I just do not see it.
Okay, fair enough. That's good. You always want to go to source material. If Lawrence is saying this, why is he saying it? He's got to have a footnote or something.
Yeah, I'm saying it because he's got his mindset. He's got this Jewish mindset. The Masoretic, it has to conform to the Jewish mindset. Never mind the
Got it. So you think he's slighted towards the Masoretic text and trying to make it conform?
Very much so.
Okay.
What about the Charles translation? It says pretty much the same thing as the Lawrence.
Say that again, sorry.
Have you heard of the Charles translation, Norman? Desmond saying that the Charles translation is the same as the Lawrence, or pretty close. Do you know any?
No, there is a difference there. I've compared the two, and Lawrence puts in his mindset. There's a lot of similarities, yes. We understand that. He hasn't completely gone, completely left. It's these little pieces here and there.
Yeah.
Wait a second.
Lawrence is highly, highly biased.
I'm looking at the Charles and the Lawrence side by side as we speak. They're almost identical on chapter 22.
Take a look.
That's correct, almost.
Take a look at Sky Tripper. There you'll get a good translation.
I've got it, Jackson. Thank you.
Hey, you know what, Jackson? By the way, I've been meaning to ask you this for about a year and a half now, and I just remembered it, so I'm going to ask it to you right now. In the Clementines, I know this is off subject. In the Clementines, the word Genesis is the Greek word what? And what do most people translate it to?
It has to do with becoming. Geneo means to birth.
So like the birthing of the universe or something?
When you use that in Greek, like it's used in John chapter 1, geneo means coming to be.
You mean like John 1:1 in the beginning?
No, on. He came into the world. Let's see. Let's see.
Sorry to throw you. I know you're not.
No, but it means coming to be. Geneto.
Okay.
Geneto.
what do most people translate it? Because it's seen as an event that happens in the Clementines, like this beginning of the world or something.
Well, yeah, it just means coming to be.
Okay.
That's all, but they've made a technical term out of it.
Okay. Okay.
The capital G.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Got it. Okay. So back. Sorry about that, guys. We can edit that part out. So I would like us to do this. One is I'm going to post this link here. Somebody on Twitter posted this link refuting the book of Enoch. And I know that Desmond's studying Enoch. I know that Norman has as well. I scanned it and I saw some errors in logic in some of his points, but he's got like 40 points. And I just thought it would be good for us to go over, because if we are basing some of our stuff on the Dead Sea Scrolls, Enoch was in there, basing some stuff on Enoch, it would be good to either be able to refute it or some of the points or whatever. And some of it, he's very regular theology as far as Baptist theology. So some of the things he's just saying it doesn't line up with, quote unquote, normal Orthodox theology, which is fine if it doesn't to me. But some of it is actually trying to say, no, this is inaccurate or incorrect, so it cannot be the word of Yah, et cetera, et cetera. So I thought it would be fun for those of you that, want to look at some of that. But we can also look at Enoch 22 and Luke 16 and see the similarities, if at all, come back and say, hey, you know what, Desmond was right, or I think Desmond is crazy, or, whatever it is. And we could...
Norman was right.
What's that?
How about Norman was right?
Or Norman was right, or Norman was crazy, or whatever. I was just saying that because he's the one that brought out the Luke 16, Enoch 22 thing at first. But
I want to throw in real quick that I think Enoch isn't the only thing that backs up this viewpoint for what Yeshua was saying about the idea of Sheol, that it's all throughout the Old Testament if you're looking at it with a certain set of eyes. Like, for instance, when it says that the bones are placed in the grave, which is the mouth of Sheol, and then it says when something goes into its mouth, then it goes into its belly. And the belly of Sheol, or the belly, is called the belly of the earth, or it's the mouth of the earth for the bones. And then it says they go into the belly of the earth, which it calls Sheol. Sorry, I had that mixed up, but I just corrected it. So this idea of the mouth in your body is higher than your belly is still this idea of deep under the earth. There's this place, this cavity where things go. And that's just one little tiny example, but they're all throughout the Old Testament, where when they describe Sheol, if you're looking at it with this set of eyes from Enoch 22 and take Jesus at face value when he talks about Lazarus and the rich man, then it all lines up. And so it's not just Enoch at taking this interpretation or being translated in the wrong way, because I am looking at the Charles and the Lawrence side by side. They say the same things. Maybe one word is different, but the idea is there. There's four
in chapter 22.
Yeah, there's 4 compartments under a mountain. People are placed in different compartments waiting for the day of the judgment. It even says, or waiting for the day of the resurrection. It even says that Abel is there, and that's where he's calling forth, making suit against his brother who slayed him. So, I mean, all the elements are there, not just one word that could be translated differently. The entire idea and context of the entire chapter lays out what Yeshua shows. And if you're reading the rest of the Bible with that context, you see it everywhere, up to the point where we're resurrected from the graves. We're resurrected and we rise up to meet him. We don't, descend down or come from anywhere. We rise up as if we were below. And it says multiple times that Sheol is below us and that heaven is above us. Now, this idea of the heliocentric cosmology of today's world, this may be a very hard concept to understand. But if you're going to take Genesis, literally, which some say you shouldn't do, but I do, and I see the world as a flat earth cosmology, the way the ancient Hebrews probably saw it, if you're looking at it through that lens, this is very easy to accept, but may not be easy to accept if you think we're a ball flying through space.
All right, cool. So if you see any other things, Desmond, in the Tanakh this week that would lend to, if you had this idea from Luke 16 of the afterlife, and you're reading it in the Tanakh this week, just put it on the Facebook page, because Jackson will put the link up on the Facebook page. Just put it in the comments down there so we can check it out.
There's actually a study which has a lot of them laid out. It's called Sheol and Destruction. and it was made by J.P. McMahon at the Way Biblical Fellowship. He goes through and he gives you so many, it'll make your mind hurt by the end. It's probably like 3 hours long, so be prepared to sit in.
Hey, Rich.
Yeah.
I got something that's much easier to look at. I saw something on Facebook, and to put me onto this, it has nothing to do with this particularly, but in Psalm 7 verse 11 in the Septuagint, and if you compare that to what you see in the KJV, it is starkly different. One says that basically that Yahweh is angry every day, and the other one says he's not. So we're talking about the differences, or either linguistic differences or translations or whatever, but that's one that might matter. It has, like I said, nothing to do with this, but it's just something that you can easily quickly.
Where is that?
Psalm 7:11.
Okay, there's JP McMahon right there on the YouTube. Psalm 7:11. Let the assembled peoples gather around you while you sit enthroned over them on high. Oh, 7:11, sorry. God is a righteous judge, a God who displays his wrath every day. That's NIV. God is a righteous judge, yes, a God who has indignation every day. That's WEB. What does the TLV say?
The nearly inspired version.
My shield is God, Savior of the upright in heart. God is a righteous judge, a God who is indignant every day. What does Young's literal translation say? That's what I want to see. God is a righteous judge, and he is not angry at all times. So what is this in? Interesting. I want to see it in Hebrew.
Well, you do have the Masoretic, I guess, Septuagint issue, because Young's, I believe, used, I wonder if it used Greek or the Hebrew there.
Elohim, Zadik, Ve'el, Zoaim, Bekol, Yom. So that's the Masoretic text. It does not have a no in there at all. But in the Septuagint, I can't read this. Can somebody read the Septuagint? There it is in the chat. It might have the no in there. He is not angry. Okay, so interesting. All right, well, we got some homework to do. Enoch 22, Luke 16. You got that YouTube video. I put up the Book of Enoch Debunked webpage. If you Enoch guys can go over that and see if he might have 38 things that are stupid, but maybe one or two are legitimate, and we could talk about them and see where everything lands, all that kind of stuff. All right, anything else? Anybody else? Jackson, is it possible to, well, I guess, can you copy the chat and just put these things in the comments once you post it on the Facebook page?
Yeah, can do that.
So that people who weren't here can. All right.
Will do.
Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it. Shabbat shalom.
Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.